right. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you might be joining us. Thank you for attending today's webinar entitled Taking the Guesswork Out of CMMC Compliance. I'm Jim Kovach. I'm your host today. I'm also the public sector leader for Zimperium. Before we begin, I'd like to do a couple of introductions. With me here today is Brian Chapman, who's the Vice President of our product management organization. Good morning. Welcome, Brian.
Good morning. Great to be here. Thank you.
We also have Dave Mihelsek, who is the former Chief Technology Officer for the Defense Information Systems Agency, affectionately known as DISA. Thank you, Dave, for joining us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me. Good morning.
And Steve Cruz, who is our federal sales engineer on our public sector team. Steve, welcome to you.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Great. Well, folks, again, thanks for joining us today. The goal and objective for you all is to hopefully walk away with a little bit of insight regarding CMMC, broadly speaking, but then very specifically relative to mobile security and where mobile fits into the CMMC landscape. I'll offer some context around the fact that it can be a little confusing when you start looking at all the various security domains and security controls, largely governed by NIST 800-171. There's also some language and vocabulary and nomenclature dynamics that can kind of present a little bit of a challenge for those who perhaps aren't overly familiar with 800-171. Or some of the vocabulary associated with mobile security. So we'll get into some of that. And then kind of, again, give you some very specific insight into the requirements. And then obviously, you know, some thoughts around how we map to some of those requirements. A little bit of housekeeping before we actually get into the content. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them. You should see them on the right-hand side. In fact, I think there's a big exclamation mark highlighting it. And then if there's any questions that we don't get to today, we'll certainly follow up with you separately. So again, thanks for joining us and participating in today's session. All right, for those who are not overly familiar with CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, think of it as the defense industrial base, primarily defense contractors is who it applies to, and it's a unifying standard, if you will, to, in layman's terms, shore up the supply chain or the security of our defense contractors. Couple of nuances that are a little bit different relative to CMMC as to why it's so critically important organizations or companies that are doing business with the Defense Department to really pay attention to it. First and foremost, it's not going away. I know there's been some talk in industry that, oh, this might be just another, you know, passing fancy in terms of the Defense Department, but it is absolutely not going away. So there will be a CMMC set of requirements that you'll have to adhere and comply with. The other dynamic is it will be enforced in the actual DFARS, so the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations, and contingent upon award, i.e. you won't get a contract award for a defense bid unless you can show you're CMMC compliant. So it's pretty significant for any defense contractors that are doing business with the government to get out in front of, to the extent possible, CMMC and kind of get their, you know, cybersecurity landscape ready to go. There was also, for folks who would like to know, there was also a GAO or Government Accountability Office audit that was done, and they did discover that the vast majority of defense contractors were in fact failing to meet various cybersecurity standards. So that's essentially what brought this about. Additionally, I think you might have seen that this won't be just a defense thing. There are indications, still a little bit early, but there are indications that this or something like this will apply to defense, or I'm sorry, to federal civilian agencies as well. They may not call it CMMC, they may call it something different, but for the most part, you can bet that Fed Civ agencies are going to have something similar. In fact, we just saw something not too long ago, a binding operational directive that just came out that starts to amplify it. You might have seen some discussions around software bill of materials, for example, or SBOMs. So all of this is kind of trending in the direction that the entire government, not just DoD, will have something in this realm. So a little bit of speculation on my part, but I'm pretty sure it's a good bet. All right, with that said, my first panel member, esteemed panel member, Dave Mahelsick. Dave, again, thanks for joining us. Would you be so kind as to give us some perspective as a former senior DoD official and kind of give us your perspective of CMMC?
Yeah, absolutely. And just by way of introduction, I served as the Chief Technology Officer for DISA, Defense Information Systems Agency, for about 10 years, and I retired in 2017. But I can tell you that this issue of that CMMC is trying to get after, and by the way, CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. Not sure how many people actually know that's what it stands for. This goes back over 10 years. So the department has been concerned about its controlled, unclassified information essentially getting out through third-party systems for more than 10 years. And if you look at the DFARS, which is the Defense Federal Acquisition Requirements, which is the regulations the DoD uses in contracting, they have been requiring their contractors to protect government-controlled, unclassified information in their systems for 10 years at this point. And going back to, I think it was 2016, they required vendors to self-certify that they met the requirements in NIST Special Pub 800-171. So this is not new. This is really an evolution. So fast forward to 2019, the department released CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification process, and published basically a process and a set of 5 different levels that vendors were going to be required to be assessed to win federal business. That immediately caused a firestorm of pushback in industry for a number of reasons. One of the reasons was industry felt like DoD was reinventing the wheel by coming up with unique requirements as opposed to just aligning to NIST Special Pub 800-171, which is kind of universally accepted and had been the previous standard. And really the second reason that there was pushback was small businesses felt that they were going to be having to face an undue burden because of the third-party certification requirement. And initially the DoD said, oh, it's not going to be a big deal. It's going to cost you, a few $1,000s to get through the process. And as DoD looked more and more into the process and the third-party accreditors got set up as well, it became clear this was going to be an onerous process. So DoD fell back, and now we're in CMMC 2.0. So it has been aligned with NIST 100-171, as well as some of the NIST 172 requirements for the highest level. It's been simplified. So there's 3 levels in the CMMC. And do we have a slide on this, Jim? Can we advance?
We do, and I think
you want me to advance to that? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm in control. So there it is. My bad. I didn't realize I was in control at this point. So we skinnied it down from 5 different levels to 3 levels. And quite frankly, I think that not only helps the potential contractor community for the DoD, but it's going to help the DoD simplify this process as well. And at that lowest level, the level 1, the foundational level, there's only a small number of 800-171 requirements, and it's all self-assessment. So theoretically, that's going to make it easier for small businesses to participate in this process.
Yeah, hey, Dave, just a couple of things here. So we're actually going to have Brian walk us through that. So I'm going to go back just one in a little bit more detail as Brian has kind of lived it. So, I do want to save some of the thunder for Brian to kind of talk us through that. But on topic in terms of the higher level, what department, and it's a little bit confusing for me too sometimes, what department is actually going to implement? Is there going to be a special programs office? Is this going to come from a certain, agency or sub-agency within DoD? What actual department for folks in the audience is going to implement this?
Well, DoD CIO has really been driving CMMC 2.0 at this point. But in terms of a single department, no, it's not going to be implemented by a single department. It's going to become part of the DFARS, Defense Federal Accounting requirements, acquisition requirements, excuse me. And essentially, it's going to be a contractual requirement that's going to be put forward in every contract that DoD lets. They're going to specify what level the contract is going to require. And there is still a rulemaking process that's going on right now. And DoD expects that to be completed and approved sometime early next year. And when that happens, we're going to start to see in DoD contracts the requirements for CMMC 2.0 to appear. So I can't tell you exactly what the future is going to hold there, but this is definitely coming. And how much it affects you and what the level of requirement is going to be is still not determined.
I was going to say, last question before we transition to Brian. Best guess on timeline. I know it's trying to guess exactly when DoD is going to do something is a challenge, but this is seemingly a early 2023 to mid, but definitely seeming falling into the 2023 calendar year of some sort.
Right, and the expectation is it'll be phased in over 2 years. When DoD originally announced CMMC 1.0, they specified it would be phased in and it would become required for all contracts by 2025. So my guess is we're going to see this phased in over about a 2-year period. It'll probably apply initially to some large and highly sensitive contracts. But over time, I would expect every contractual action that comes out of any DoD organization to have a CMMC requirement of some kind.
Roger that. Hey, Brian, again, thanks for joining us. And Dave, obviously,
apologize for stealing your thunder, Brian, but a picture says is worth 1,000 words.
No worries. We'll circle back with some questions for you later, I'm sure, Dave. Brian, you have the perspective of actually living through this in a previous life. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience and, again, from your perspective, how you see CMMC unfolding? And you might be on mute still, Brian.
I am that guy in this webinar. So welcome, everyone. As Jim mentioned, my name is Brian Chapman, and I have been working in product management for nearly 2 decades in mobile and wireless security. And through that time, to Jim's point, I've been required to deliver products that have government compliance, including NIST and CMMC. So I definitely have the scars to prove it on that end, and excited to be part of this discussion to really shine some light on CMMC compliance, but also with an eye towards mobile security. Before we transition things, though, into the mobile specific, I do want to finally advance to that slide that we were excited to show to dig in and give you guys really sort of the Cliff's Notes of the differences between CMMC 1.0 and 2.0. So with that, let's go ahead and dig in and take a look. So to start, there are now only 3 CMMC levels, as you can see on the right. CMMC level 2 and 4 from the original framework have been eliminated, leaving only the 3 current CMMC levels. So you can see these are known as level 1 foundational. Up the graphic we go, level 2 advanced, and then finally level 3 expert. So if we dig into each of these new levels for just a second, the new level 1 is comparable to the old CMMC level 1, but the key here is that it now only requires an annual self-assessment and affirmation by company leadership. No changes to the 17 basic cyber hygiene practices were required. And level 1 is based on those 17 controls that are found in FAR 52.204-21, basic safeguarding of covered contractor information. So these controls look to protect covered contractor information systems and limit access to authorized users. So if we look at the new CMMC level 2, the old CMMC level 3 now becomes level 2. So in addition, 20 controls have been eliminated from the original framework's level 3 requirements. So what does this mean? It means it's really leaving contractors only having to implement the 110 controls from NIST 800-171. The DoD will identify what they call prioritized acquisitions that must undergo an independent third-party assessment against the new level 2 requirements. But all other organizations will only need to perform a self-assessment and affirmation by company leadership at this level as well. So lastly, the new level 3 or expert level This will replace CMMC levels 4 and 5 from the original framework. And this is really focused on reducing the risk for APTs, or advanced persistent threats. The DoD is still determining the specific security requirements for this expert level 3, but they have indicated that the requirements will be based on, of course, NIST SP 800-171's 110 controls, plus a subset of NIST SP 800-172 controls. And certainly at this level, the assessments will be government-led.
Hey, Brian, and for the audience, Brian mentioned, several different standards there, 171, 172, and I think a couple of others. We will have a resource section available for the audience to pull all this, so don't worry about feverishly trying to capture all of these terms and references here. We will provide those resources to you. But Brian, there's another I've seen out there notion, and I don't see it here in the picture, but can you talk a little bit about the aspect of POAMs, which is plans of actions and milestones, and sort of, was that there originally, not there, and is it now? And maybe just give a little sense of the POAM aspect of this.
Oh, sure. So that is definitely a significant change from CMMC 1.0. So the CMMC 2.0 model allows limited use of POAMs, or plans of actions and milestones. So at the time of assessment, an organization can submit a POAM in lieu of meeting certain non-critical security controls. But it's important to note that POAMs will only be accepted for 1 and 3 point controls. POAMs will not be accepted for the majority of controls worth 5 points, the more critical controls. So again, this is a significant change from CMMC 1.0, which did not allow POAMs, and instead made CMMC certification the basis of really go, no-go decisions for contract awards.
Great. And just a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions about some of these specifics, again, feel free to use the question icon there in the right-hand side of your screen. Well, awesome. Brian, any further thoughts that you'd like the audience to be aware of?
Yeah, I think just again on the notion of Cliff Notes again, just to summarize the levels of information protection for each of the new levels of the CMMC 2.0 model. The new level 1 only applies to companies that focus on the protection of FCI or federal contract information. The new level 2 applies to companies that need to securely store and share controlled unclassified information, or CUI. And the new level 3 also applies to companies that need to securely store and share CUI, but this is on DoD's highest priority programs.
Gotcha, and that makes sense. Awesome. Well, thank you. And again, I'm sure we'll get some questions, so if you wouldn't mind sticking around for sure. Now we'll transition to Steve Cruz and sort of the meat of today's session, which is really a drill down into how all of what was just talked about with Brian and Dave map or align with mobile security. Again, I mentioned at the onset that there's some language and some vocabulary. As an example, you'll see in the 171 requirement, the reference in the mobile section to virus protection software as an example. Well, when you look at what mobile threat defense is as an industry term, that's exactly it. So it's very crystal clear that you need virus protection software for your mobile device as an example. But again, I'll let Steve kind of take us through all of that. One thing I'd like to do, Steve, before we jump to you, is just a little exercise here for the audience. I'm going to ask this to just amplify the notion of importance of our mobile device. So if you're in the audience, please go ahead and take your mobile device, unless you're watching this on your mobile device, which some of you might be. Please go ahead and take your mobile device and, put it in another room, or put it in a drawer beside you if you're in an office and a desk. And let's just count how many seconds and or minutes go by before you start feeling some sense of anxiety that your mobile device is not with you right at your arm's reach. I've done this before on podcasts and panel sessions, and sometimes it draws a reaction. Well, thank you for doing that, because I don't want to have anything to do with my mobile device. No, the concept that I'm trying to articulate here is we've heard a lot of messaging from CISA as an example Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency within DHS, one of the concepts was shields up, right, for all endpoints, including mobile devices. It is the endpoint. And that cybersecurity really needs to be a kitchen table issue for all of us, right? So that we're doing smart things on our mobile devices for sure in the cyber landscape. Well, what's the one device that we all generally bring to the kitchen table? Right or wrong, and we probably shouldn't, but for right or wrong, it's the mobile device. So I offer all of that to amplify the fact that thinking about mobile security, thinking about your mobile device in the context of it being used as a workforce utility, just like your laptop is super important. So I'll get off my soapbox for a minute. Some of you are probably already stressing out that your device is in a drawer somewhere if you actually did that exercise. So Steve, over to you. Walk us through a little bit about the specifics of sort of the mapping that you did relative to the requirements in mobile threat defense.
Absolutely. I'm Steve Cruz. I'm a senior sales engineer at Zimperium. I've got 16 years supporting the federal government in cybersecurity. I have CISSP and I have solutions engineering experience in identity management, zero trust, and mobile device security. So Jim, you make a great point about the prominence of mobile in the work environment. You know, a lot of people don't bring their laptop, they'll bring a mobile device to a meeting. So it's a really good point, and they are out there for various work profiles and roles within the agency. But I'm going to go ahead and walk you through what we found and the importance of mobile device security in CMMC and how that fits. If you look at just classifying terms first, the EMM, or Enterprise Mobile Management, MDM, Mobile Device Management, and Mobile Application Management. In NIST 800-124, which is mobile managing security for mobile devices, they call out the difference and the need for mobile threat detection. And those differences capabilities are real-time continuous monitoring, assessing apps after deployment and during runtime, and protecting mobile devices against wireless attacks and wireless networks. Also, the mobile OS, side-loaded apps, etc. These are all things that you need mobile threat protection to constantly be monitoring.
And Steve, I want to kind of foot stomp this, because what we have seen in sort of our travels is a lot of organizations might think that they already have mobile security covered because they do in fact already have an MDM, right? Or some type of EMM technology. And as you're pointing out here, straight from NIST, again, don't take our word for it, but straight from NIST, and I think you have another slide here from MITRE, there is a significant distinction between MDMs, EMMs, and what MTDs do. And the short of it is you cannot accomplish what is required for CMMC specific to 800-171 without MTD. Your MDM will not get you there, is the point.
Right. So this call out is referenced in the CMMC assessment guide for mobile devices. So to further illustrate that point, if you look at the mobile attack framework, if you see in the kind of green is the universal endpoint management. So basically a management capability for mobile devices that gives you about 40% coverage. If you layer on top MTD or threat protection, it gives you about 95% coverage working together with those solutions. So it's a great solution. It gives you coverage. If you think about things like privilege escalation, modification of the trusted computing environment on the mobile device, out-of-band updates of software, of approved apps, and network scanning. Those are some of the gaps that are not covered by management. So it's important to have a security-focused solution on the device.
And for folks who might not be overly familiar with this MITRE attack matrix, again, it is out there. You can find it yourself. But essentially, it is through the lens of the bad actor or the attacker that they take in terms of the 13 different techniques and the, I want to say, 90 some tactics within each of those techniques that they would employ to try to hack into your organization. And so for folks who aren't familiar with that, that's what this is intended to convey.
Right. So just moving forward, in NIST 800-171, they define the mobile device. They talk about it being portable. They talk about it being, a small form factor and having its own power supply. But basically, they're separating it from a laptop. And we know that difference, and it's pretty clear. But they also go forward and talk about why you need mobile device security and protection specific to mobile devices, different than a traditional endpoint. And that comes around management, identity management, and also mobile threat protection. So specifically, mandatory protective software of scanning for malicious code. So that's the gap that we're trying to fill here, and understanding that we're working with the other vendors to integrate a solution that gives you that MITRE attack coverage. Another point to bring out on this reference is it says the need to provide security for mobile devices goes beyond this requirement. So many controls for mobile devices are reflected in other CUI security requirements. So what you have to think about there is anywhere where it's referencing logging, reporting, incident handling, and references to endpoints, those also apply to mobile devices because mobile devices are endpoints.
That's right.
So I'm going to go through some of the controls that we wanted to point out and highlight through CMMC that you should be asking yourself questions about. Do I have coverage for this? And if I do, how do I coverage? Because part of this goal here is to get through a successful self-assessment and third-party assessment, and you have to be able to document how you're doing that. So hopefully we can shed some light on that. So the first control, access control, there are several capabilities in here required, but it's also defined in NIST 800-124 of control the connection of mobile devices. So that includes scanning devices for malicious code and updating virus protection software and scanning for critical updates and patches.
And that's where some of the, Steve, that's, if you may,
Right.
that's where some of the vocabulary starts to become a little nuanced because, again, there is a whole industry side of this with mobile threat defense and some of the, vocabulary we use versus what's in NIST. And so that's part of what we're attempting to do here is bridge some of that vocabulary.
Right. Another point I want to reference is awareness and training. So that has to include mobile device use cases, not only in the training, but if you think about things like SMS phishing, side-loaded apps, and the user being the administrator of a device. So even in a managed device, the way it's different from a traditional laptop is the form factor and structure, the way software is delivered to mobile devices, the way management is done. A user always has the power to remove software. There might be consequences, but they can do it. And some of the risks associated that are not always aware. So part of the training should include mobile awareness, but also letting the administrator and the user know when they're doing something risky on that mobile device, like a specific application, the privacy risks, the security risks associated with that, any side-loaded applications that are allowed to be loaded on the device can come with risks, and then any threats involved in phishing links and stuff. So immediate awareness to both the administrator and the user is a very big part of educating the users and completing that secure environment.
And in this new world of remote work relative to COVID and whatnot, we have seen a significant increase in phishing. It has become, for the most part, I believe I saw something just the other day that it's the #1 threat vector now, phishing.
Right.
And is or will be on the mobile device for sure. We've seen some significant upticks. We know it's relevant as phishing tends to be the sort of the vector for 0 days and 0-day attacks as well. So to really foot stomp and amplify the protection aspect of phishing can't be overstated.
Definitely true. Moving on, the configuration management piece. If you think about whitelisting, blacklisting, application execution policy is called out. Again, how are you doing that on mobile device? Authorized software, how are you vetting that software? And control and monitor of user installed software. So those typically, those device and application software are updated on the device by the user. So anytime that profile or that product can change on the device, then you need to be able to scan that, find that change, and find out whether it's still in compliance. So as part of CMMC, you have to be prepared as an organization to identify, review, and document that capability of whether those applications were approved or denied. In addition, identification and authentication, that comes into play as far as mapping that, mapping threats. If you think about the risk involved in security, that's always my focus. Mapping that threat from the user to the device to the threat. So in one capability, being able to go back and find that incident detail and make sure that those are included in that. That leads to incident response. So again, when you're looking at mobile, you have to be able to track, document, and report on incidents on mobile devices. So do you currently have something that's alerting not only administrators, but incident and security investigators as to what's happening on mobile devices? So not only specific incidents with forensics and threat details, but the ability to evaluate the incident detail to identify trends and then the workflow of incident handling. So yes, this was identified. How was it handled? Has it been closed and remediated? So that's a whole workflow that your security tool needs to be able to support on mobile environment as well as your legacy endpoints. So when we were talking about logging, reporting, that applies here to incident response. You have to have that same workflow on the mobile environment. With risk assessment, again, scanning for vulnerabilities in real time and periodically, not only when on a regular basis is required, but also when new threats emerge or updates are out. You have to find out in your deployed mobile fleet what is currently upgradable. We know that device hardware gets expired, so you have to understand the vulnerabilities on that hardware as well as the software and whether they can be updated or whether they need to be replaced. So that's very specific to mobile devices. They have a shorter window typically on that lifetime. If you look at that in the risk assessment.
And just real quick, so this is great for the compliance aspect of it, but if you're a CISO within an organization, you probably want that visibility anyway, right? We would think that the ability to see the security posture of your mobile fleet would be something very relevant, especially in our case where it can be very timely and actionable.
Yes.
So while this is great for compliance, it also has some significant real world value.
Yeah, absolutely. And typically what I see is that's kind of siloed in the mobile management piece. They manage that, but there's not a lot of awareness in the security side. So getting that information, vulnerability detail, updated, current to the security team is very important as well. So finally, the last slide and the major part of the detail where it specifically calls out malicious code, protection against malicious code within the organizational systems, updating malicious code and mechanisms when new releases are available, and performing periodic scans of system, real-time scans against files, external sources, files downloaded when they're opened and executed. So that's where you really need something. You really need security on that device in the same way you would a laptop. You have to have a mobile threat protection software on the device. and it's called out. If you think about the entry location of malware on a mobile device, we already talked about SMS and phishing. There's potentially where it's allowed private email is on there and not scanned. Side-loaded apps are possible. There are app stores that are available for both iOS and Android where they can side-load applications. And from 170 or from 800 171. This includes protection. You have to have protection against virus, against spyware, against Trojan horse applications and ransomware. So again, when you're doing your assessment and you're documenting how are you protecting against these on the device in real time in the mobile environment. So when you go through the document on CMMC, they have an assessment consideration which specifically says for any system, and they call out mobile devices. So for any system, workstation, servers, gateways, and mobile devices, they call out malicious code protection must be provided, identified, and documented. So that's in the CMMC discussion assessment considerations. Their example they give when buying a new computer, you protect that to protect the company information from viruses and spyware, you buy and install anti-malware software. So that's exactly what we're recommending you do on mobile devices is you apply anti-malware software on the device just as you would any other asset in your environment to protect that CUI data. So that leads me specifically to what we provide at Zimperium. So we provide a mobile threat defense capability for device protection. We also protect against network attacks, malicious apps, and phishing. We do that on device. And we also provide the full documentation of risk, vulnerabilities, threats, and incidents, and the forensic evidence for further follow-up. So not only is this protection on the device, but there's a back-end capability to feed your other tools, automation with that security information from your mobile environment. And that gives you that mobile visibility that the CISOs are looking for and that the compliance officers are looking for.
And Steve, if I could just jump in, just one more thing on zips. To me, I think it's really important for the audience to really get a feel for on-device MTD solution, right? So what really separates us? There's meeting the requirements, and then there's being as secure as you can possibly be. And so for us, that on-device aspect goes back to what you said earlier, and when Jim was talking about MITRE and everything, it's we do not rely on cloud-based lookups, content scanning, or other privacy invasive techniques to keep mobile devices secure. So that's sort of the pride of Zimperium, and that's what we built. That's patented within our solution, and important for folks to consider going forward.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thanks, Brian.
Sure.
I also want to add that we can extend this protection to all of your mobile environments. So in addition to on-device protection for mobile devices, we can also do app security. So our mobile threat defense platform can add security to mobile applications. It can embed security. We also have code protection capabilities, white box key protection capabilities so that you can inform the whole life cycle. So if you're considering developing custom apps, and one thing I didn't point out, if you look back at the risk assessment requirement in CMMC, you're also required any custom developed software has to be protected. So if you have custom apps, we have the ability to protect that code, protect the information, and put the same defense capabilities in the application itself. So it's something to be considered. You have to document those apps, those private apps that you're maybe sideloading from an organization for productivity capability, for job roles, et cetera. Those need to be protected as well. And our mobile device security platform can fall into the development lifecycle and help you build that capabilities.
Yeah, and Steve, thank you for that. And for the audience, again, that concludes the sort of the drill down part of our agenda and making sure that you had some insight on how all of this is mapped to mobile security. So as you can see, or as you probably saw, there were some very specific areas within 800.171 that may not be necessarily blatantly obvious relative to mobile security. So hopefully we've accomplished that for you. We only have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask a couple of quick questions and then finish off with a summary. And I'll ask this to probably Brian or Dave, but if I'm a subcontractor or supplier, will CMMC apply? So I think the context there is hey, if I'm a defense prime contractor, of course it applies, but if I'm a subcontractor doing that defense work, will CMMC apply? Is that Brian or Dave? Which one of you will answer that?
I'd like to take that. I think potentially, absolutely, it's going to apply, but it's going to depend on what kind of information you're going to hold as part of that contract. But so I'm going to say something that might be a little bit controversial here. My expectation is for any prime contractor, no matter what size business they are, they're going to be level 2 or above. The only subcontractor that I could see at level 1 would be an organization that might fulfill, orders for hardware or software that holds nothing more than what those orders are. If you hold any form of information that's that's government related, schedules, locations, personnel, etc., I'm going to guess that's going to take you to a level 2. So I would say organizations, whether they be primes or subs, should be prepared for level 2 at a minimum.
Yeah, and I would just. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, I would just stress. I mean, my take on this, is really like was just said. It's about the information level. I'm not sure it matters so much how you're classified, right? But it's if you've got FCI, you got FCI. If you've got CUI, you got CUI. And if that CUI is on DoD's highest priority programs, you're going to be expected to have level 3 compliance. So. To me, it's less about really what you're even labeled as, and it's more just a focus on protecting information at the right level.
That may tie into another question that is here. So which level of CMMC must my company attain? I think that's it depends scenario, but is that very similar in terms of an answer?
I think exactly. So. Yeah. Do you want to go ahead, Dave? Yep, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to depend on what kind of data the government expects you to process in fulfilling that contract. But let's be blunt, FCI is literally any information coming from the DoD, unless it's been specifically approved for public release, or approved by a PAO, the DoD is going to publish that. It's a minimum FCI. And in my old organization, DISA, almost every bit of information I handled on a daily basis was that was unclassified was CUI. Schedules, architectures, requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So your mileage is going to vary, and I would guess that we might see some phasing in, but over time, if you're dealing with any real DoD information, anything operational for sure, it's going to be level 2 or above.
Thank you, Dave. And we're just about out of time, team. So again, thank you for your participation and contributions to today's agenda. And the audience, I'll just leave you with a couple of thoughts. As you consider your CMMC journey and look for solution providers relative to mobile threat defense, as Imperium, we'd certainly like to be a part of that engagement with you and conversation with you. You should realize that our technology fundamentally has a very unique differentiation in that we do our detections on device. I think Brian mentioned this a little bit ago. This is facilitated through our patented Z9 detection engine, but this allows us to do a couple things. One, not create a critical dependency on the internet or the cloud for you to get protection, but also enables zero-day protection as well. Multiple deployment options, flexibility. Think of that as you begin your journey. Battle tested. Again, we are deployed as part of the DMUC, the Defense Mobility Unclassified Capability Program at DISA, and so we are certainly battle tested in that regard. The last thing is another consideration is think about your ecosystem and making sure that your tech obviously plays nice in the sandbox, and just know that that is something that can help future-proof your tech investment going forward. So that should certainly be part of the criteria, and that gets into integrations with MDMs and SIMs and SOARs and other things as well. So with that, I will stop here. Thank you again for your time, and feel free to reach out to us should you have any questions after today's session. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.